Greetings, book lovers everywhere. I'm E-Train and welcome to E-Train Talks. Here at E-Train Talks, I read, review, and discuss everything books in the hopes to inspire others to love reading as much as I do. Today on E-Train Talks, I am so thrilled to welcome John Gallagher, the creator of the Max Meow series, to the E-Train Talks podcast. The Max Meow series is a fantastic graphic novel series that stars a terrific crime-fighting duo, Max Meow, a superhero cat who loves broccoli, and Mindy, a scientific kid genius. And the duo never run out of fun ways to save the day. Welcome, John, to E-Train Talks.
Hey, thanks, E-Train. I'm really excited to be here.
Well, we're all so excited to have you here. You're my first graphic novelist that I've had on the podcast, so that's going to be a really interesting chat.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I love to talk about that.
So first of all, thank you so much for joining me today. It's an honor to meet and talk with you. And one thing I wanted to note before I start asking the questions is I love the quote at the end of your Max Meow books that shares how you told your mom that you'd read every book in your elementary school library and there was nothing left to read. And your mom replied with, "Just because a book's over doesn't mean the story's end." They're such powerful words. Can you share a bit more about how your book journey began?
Oh, yeah. Well, and that really ties in with the question of who's responsible for me creating comics. And I like to respond that it's my mom's fault. So basically, as a kid, I loved, I loved to pretend and imagine things. And I saw cartoons on television. There was an early version of the Justice League called Super Friends.
Oh.
I became enamored with Batman and Superman, Aquaman and Wonder Woman. And then one day I went into a grocery store with my mom and there was a comic book, which I didn't know existed. And I'm like, well, that's a superhero. It was the character Captain Marvel, who's now known as Shazam, not the new Captain Marvel.
Oh.
And I started reading that and I was just hooked. And I really learned to read with comics. So because I kind of, at that point, I put down all the Dr. Seuss books and things like that, which my parents didn't mind because most comics are actually written at a higher reading level than the age of the person reading it. Mm-hmm. And I would dress up like Batman. I'd hide behind a door and tackle my big brother and pretend Joker. And then I am not kidding. One day he chased me around the house with a wiffle ball bat. And I was like, "Mom, Joe's being a supervillain."
He's the Batman.
Exactly. He was the Batman. That's very good. And, my mom didn't have much sympathy because I had taken all her leggings and stretched them out, pretending they were spider webs for Spider-Man. So she was the one who I said, "Mom, I need more comics." And she handed me a pencil and paper and said, "Well, you tell me what happens next." And that's really what I've been doing ever since. And a lot of the ideas that I come up with, I usually try to channel that 6-year-old or 5 or 6-year-old that I was and think, what's interesting? Oh, I'll do that.
Yeah. Well, leave it to moms to kind of change our futures.
Yes, exactly. That's a common story among cartoonists and graphic novelists. I'm sure writers and all sorts of creative people.
This is an extra question that I really wanted to include. Who do you prefer, DC or Marvel?
Oh, that's a good question. I grew up mostly reading DC because I lived in a really small town, and I think they thought the Marvel comics were too racy somehow. So only Spider-Man and maybe the Fantastic Four could I get my hands on when I was real little. So I read a lot of Batman especially, and Robin became my favorite character. I have to say, I like the Marvel movies better, but I prefer the DC comics. Okay.
So, Max Meow Donuts in Danger was an entertaining and fun read. There's one quote I found on the back of the book that really caught my eye. The quote describes Max Meow Donuts in Danger as a heaping helping of candy-colored fun. It really is a delightfully fun and silly read. I especially like that it has a sweet message inside the story. Do you always try to include a positive message or lesson in your novels?
I do. I think sometimes the message comes out. I just start off telling the story and kind of figure out what they're going to learn from it. And it's kind of like, any day you get up in the morning and you go and do things, it's not like you're planning on learning something, but we almost always do.
Yeah.
And my messages usually relate to things that I have felt. I try not to hit people over the head with my messages. And because, when you're being preached to or told what to think, people resent that and it doesn't feel authentic. So I try to have my characters learn from their mistakes. And usually my messages tie in with things like believing in yourself, because, that relates to me being a cartoonist. I was told by a lot of people, don't go into cartooning. There's no money in that, as if that mattered to me when I was 12 years old. And, I even had people tell me I wasn't a very good artist. And it's one of those things where if I had listened to those people, I would have given up a long time ago.
Well, I've got to say you are a great artist. I love the cartoon drawings in the Max Meow series. And I also love like the kind of special effects you sort of add. It's not even like a movie. It's like a movie, but it's not actually a movie. It's kind of like you make it feel that way.
Yeah, well, that really relates to me first reading comics after I watched cartoons, because I always sort of read the comics and thought of it as a cartoon on paper. And I think that sometimes when I'm working on it, I have an editor at Random House, Shayna Corey, who's really great. She's a writer herself. And sometimes she'll remind me that it's not a movie. I have to pare down the words a little bit. But thank you very much, because that's really how I feel when I'm creating it.
Yeah. Don't let the doubters just force you to not do what you love. That's a great message.
Yeah, exactly. And, in the first book, Max, actually, I'll pull these up. So the first book, Max Meow Cat Crusader, is really the origin of Max. He gets his powers, and he kind of is like, well, I've got a costume, I've got powers, that makes me a superhero. And, one of the things I like to talk about is that just because you're stronger than someone, that doesn't make you better or the hero. So Max has to learn, from his mistakes. He has to learn that maybe he should have a plan before he smashes through a wall. His friend Mindy, who's a super scientist, she's often the voice of reason. Book 2, which you have next to you, that's a different sort of story, and that's where Mindy has become a superhero, and she's kind of nervous to make a mistake, so she'd rather not try at first. And Max, who has no problem making mistakes, is like, you just got to do it, Mindy. And I think that's what I deal with when I talk to people that want to be writers or want to be creators, and they're often holding themselves back. So it kind of relates to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You really need a balance between taking risks and also kind of just being smart and making good decisions.
Yes, exactly. We all have to take, scary steps sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but you kind of have to don't jump off a cliff without having a parachute.
Right, exactly. And it is one of those things where, again, I try not to hit people over the head with these ideas.
Mm-hmm.
I want to make, the first thing I want people to get from this is it's really fun to read.
Yeah.
There's a lot of goofiness, and someone referred to it as frantic sometimes. I like to think of it as almost like a Bugs Bunny cartoon where all things are happening all at once. And that was kind of, in a way, that was kind of like how my life felt when I was a kid, because things get thrown at you all the time. And I just wanted kids that relate to that idea or would be amused by it to enjoy reading. And, if they learn something, that's great.
Yeah. That's kind of the joys of reading. You kind of start off with the amazing comics and gets you hooked, and then you kind of go into other books. And I know that you're an advocate for reading, and your books, they're kind of for readers who are kind of reluctant. Your book is a really great start for them, and they'll always probably go back to the Max Meow series when they feel like it, because it's kind of like a comfort book.
Yeah, I can see that. And, one of my big inspirations is my son, Will, who was 10 when I came up with the idea for Max Meow. And I developed it with an after-school comics class. We were just creating a character. And at the time, I think we called him Captain Cat. But Will had, we found out later, Will has dyslexia and he hated reading. But Dogman was a book series.
Yeah.
He didn't realize he was reading. He was having too much fun. So when I came back home with Captain Cat, Will was sort of like, can we work on this together? And the idea of him being excited to not only read but write with me made it too good to pass up. So, and that's really one of the big inspirations for this book series, because and Will, he doesn't do as much anymore. He's more of a theater person right now.
Yeah, theater's great.
Yeah, and he it's funny because he's actually, I just was over at the dress rehearsal. He is Shrek in the Shrek musical in middle school now. So while I talk to you, my son is on stage covered in green.
Well, this is kind of an extra question. I know I'm just piling you with questions, but how did you come up with the name Max Meow?
Oh, well, again, I got to give credit to Will, because I was calling him Captain Cat, and I just thought that was really funny. And when I started talking to Random House about doing this as a book series, for some reason, they just hated Captain Cat. They were like, you got to come up with something else. And Will helped me write down a list of like 20 different names, like Electra Cat, and I can't really remember any of the others, but he came up with not only Max Meow as the name, but the Cat Crusader.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, is he was 10, and I'm like, well, if a 10-year-old comes up with it, then there's something really good about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I sent the names to the publisher, and that was the one they thought was great as well. And what I'll do is I'll run it by other kids, when I have an idea, because if they're like, huh, I know that I'm getting too tricky maybe.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, kids like yourself are the biggest inspiration for all of this.
Yeah, it's a great idea. Kind of running your stories by kids, your readers. Like, adults might not read the Max Meow series, but kids, they're like your main audience. We're your biggest fans. So
yeah, it's funny because I go to comic book conventions, and half my fans are usually kids like 7 to 12, and the other half are people that just love cats, and they want to buy anything that has a cat on it. And but it's funny because some kids have actually come up to me and said, "Thank you for doing a cat book," because they're like, "I don't like dogs, so I don't like Dog Man. Everybody picks on me." It's like some people like Max Meow. They were waiting for him.
So what are some ways we can all be superheroes like Max Meow?
I think one of the best things to do is to really give yourself a break, because I know that even when I was younger, I would give myself a hard time if I was trying to draw something and couldn't draw it, or if I goofed up and maybe didn't study for a test and things like that. And what I found was I was using all this negative energy to beat myself up. And when I kind of focused on the positive with things, it sort of helped me go and do positive things for other people. So it's kind of like being good to yourself so you can be good to others.
Yeah. So I find it interesting that you don't just write the words in your books, but you actually create the illustrations as well. So this leads me to the question, which comes first, the story or the pictures?
Yeah, that's a great question, E-Train. I would say it's a little bit of both. Usually when I'm trying to come up with a book for Max Meow, I really just sort of go through my head thinking like of things that can be happening. It starts with ideas of mostly about funny things that can be happening or exciting things that can be happening. And then I start to think of building the story around that. And then I will start to sketch it out, usually in like a very rough stick figure kind of way. And then as I do that, the story kind of keeps developing with me. So it's, Stan Lee, who created Spider-Man, he worked with people like Steve Ditko and Jack Kirby, and they would talk about an idea. And while Stan Lee would come up with like a basic story, then Jack Kirby, who helped create the Hulk and Captain America, he would draw out the entire story, and then Stan Lee would go in and add words. And I kind of do that all in my own head. So it's a mix. It usually starts with the ideas, and then I'll start to just write the story and scribble little, words as I'm going. And then I'll go back and usually change things. But that's I don't know if that's a very concise answer, but it's my method.
Yeah, and it's a good method. I like hearing all the different methods that authors and I guess illustrators now too, because this is the first time I'm interviewing an illustrator. Their techniques, because I get writer's block all the time, and I don't necessarily. I'm not really an artist, but if I do want to create doodles and stuff, I just resort to just drawing myself over and over because I don't know what else to draw. So it's great to learn new techniques from authors and illustrators like you.
Yeah, and then I don't know if you saw in the back, usually have a how to draw section.
Yeah.
And I think in book 2, it's a how to draw Mindy. Book 1 has how to draw Max, or the Cat Crusader. And that was something I always enjoyed when I was younger. And they kind of disappeared from books for a while, from comics, until Dave Pilkey brought it back with Dog. And so I try to include that as well. And usually it's neat because people will send me their drawings of Max Meow, and I always love that.
So is there a character in the Max Meow series that is your most treasured?
Well, Max and Mindy are best friends, and they each kind of represent a different part of my personality. Like there are times where I'm the goofball that will jump in without thinking about things because I want to, help somebody, or it's interesting. I find myself being Max Meow, and then Mindy is the part of me that I wish I was maybe more, where she's more logical. But I will say Mindy is really like the character that I love the most, partially because I have a daughter she's 20 now, but she was the first partner I had to work on comics, and we created some characters ourselves. And a lot of Mindy is based on my daughter and some other people that I know in life. And I always wanted to create a character that helped kids, especially girls, feel like they could be scientists. Because there used to be a lot of reports of that girls, once they got to a certain age, would stop thinking they could do math and science. And so when I created Mindy, that was sort of like the creation of this character I'd been sort of working on for a long time in my head. Whereas Mindy or Max Meow just sort of popped into my head and, wrote himself. Mindy is it's almost like my daughter in that I think about the way she thinks about things is the way my daughter used to really think things out.
Like Max Meow, Mindy, all the characters are kind of a piece of you.
Right. And in book 4 that's coming out in October, I actually introduced Mindy's family, and she has a brother that she argues with a lot, and there'll be more of that in book 5. Actually, they have a really serious argument, and that was one of those things where I was the youngest in my family, but I had a brother and a sister who kind of like butted heads a lot. And it's funny because as I was writing that story, I realized, oh, this was inspired by my brother and sister. And sometimes these things sort of sneak into your books without you really even planning it.
So one thing I really like about your Max Meow series is how you end most chapters with funny little cliffhangers. For instance, who is coming through the portal? Where are they coming from? What was that grumpy cat thinking? I like to call them the who, where, whats. Anywhere, where do you come up with your silly humor like the who, where, whats?
Well, I have to give credit where it's due, and that starts with the 1960s Batman TV series. They used to always have 2 episodes. They'd be taking on the Penguin, and the first episode would always end with a cliffhanger where they're tied up in a giant umbrella that's about to fall into lava. And there were always these questions like, will Batman and Robin survive? And I loved that stuff as a kid because at that time, I really didn't know if they would survive.
Yeah.
So I had to wait to the next episode, and they'd say, same bat time, same bat channel. And that was really a big part of the inspiration. Also in school, they always used to talk about if you were writing an article, you would always do, what is it? Who, what, where, when, and why.
Yeah.
How. And it's, I started doing that with just 1 chapter in the first book. And before I knew it, that had become sort of the thing. In the 3rd book, I decided, somebody wrote me an email and they're like, why do you always do that? And it was just one person. Most people like it. And I sent the book into my editor, and she's like, why did you take out the who, what, where, and whens. And I was like, oh, I didn't think people liked that anymore. And she's like, no, Max Meow has to always have that. So sometimes I just go right into keep reading, but I like to add those in because it's also a great way for like a reluctant reader to think back about what just happened and have them remember.
Yeah, and constructive criticism, it's definitely helpful, but I know for a fact that you shouldn't just stop doing my favorite part of the Max Meow series, like, and so many others because of one critic. And it's also good that, like, it's kind of, they're searching through the novel and they find something they don't like. That's good, but and you don't take that to heart. That's what my mom always tells me. Don't take, like, what I say to you about your writing. Usually it isn't bad. I just take it to heart so much. Just don't let that stop you.
Yep. And it's funny how certain ways people can say things can affect you and make you like doubt. And again, it's more a case of sometimes it's great to have a support group like my editor to say, no, we love that. That's great. Keep doing it. And, and that's the only person in all these books that has said anything like that. And I sort of was like, well, that's okay. They don't like it, but everybody else does.
Yeah. But do you, I know how some chapters you don't have the who, where, what, whens, and some you do. Is there like a certain formula?
Sometimes if I hit a point with the chapter where I feel like the reader's going to want to keep reading right away, I might skip that.
Yeah.
It's sort of like, oh, they're just going to keep reading. They're going to want, keep reading now. And some other times I kind of want the reader, if I know that I'm going to change the scenery, like go to a different person or character, I might ask the questions to sort of stop the reader for a second so they can, in a way, get a breather. And then when they go to the next chapter, they're thinking about those things, but then maybe something completely different is going on.
Another one of those that I really liked is, when are we going to actually answer any of these questions?
Yeah, you caught me because a big part of it was that I sometimes never, ever answer these questions.
Yeah.
The third question is just a joke.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why is that Grumpy Cat? There's this one character, Grumpy Cat, that shows up, or he's the grumpy old cat, I call him. And he shows up every now and then to be mean to people, but something bad always happens, like a giant, I can't remember, like donuts fall on his car, or a robot stomps his motorcycle, and that's sort of the one where sometimes there's mean people in the world, and you always kind of hope that, oh, he'll get his someday. And but I also, there's something I like about having that character that pops up every now and then to sort of say something snarky.
Yeah. I wanted to include that sort of who, where, when thing in my book review. That's why I said, is there pizza in the other dimension? So, do you ever face writers and artist block when drawing and writing? And if so, what do you do to help overcome your roadblocks in your creative journey?
Again, another good question. And yeah, I definitely face times when I can't get the writing going or the art. And the best thing to do at that point is to get out of the house, because I work in a studio in my house, and there's times where I sit and I'm looking at either the paper or my iPad where I draw a lot of my comics, and I just can't get going. And the best thing I can do is go for a walk with my dog, maybe even like go to the store, or I go to the coffee shop. And for some reason, like, all these other conversations around me help me to focus on my drawing and writing. And it's almost like I need a distraction to push out of my head.
Yeah.
Some people listen to music and things like that, but I used to get really upset. I talk about being down on yourself. I get so upset with myself, like, I've got all this time, why can't I write? And then a lot of it is just relaxing and letting it come to you.
Yeah, one time in the shower, I was singing to songs by Queen, and then like this idea came randomly into my head for a book, and then like poof, and then I just start coming up with all the details. It's mainly like inspiration. It can come whenever you don't expect it.
Right. That's why, yeah, a lot of people I know actually keep little sketchbooks or notepads, or if they have a mobile phone, they'll write up notes. And I have this tendency to write ideas on little Post-its, but then I'll lose them, and I'll find them later and I'll be like, oh, that's a really good idea. I got to use that. So, and it seems like the good ideas will keep popping up in your head after a while.
I really want to know, and I'm sure my listeners are curious as well, how long have you been creating comics?
Well, there's two answers. I've been creating comics professionally for about 20 years. I studied graphic design in college, and I went to a university that actually didn't have illustration classes. So I was self-taught. I would every night pull out comics and try to draw in the style of my favorite artists and learn all the different steps of comics. And about 20 years ago, I came up with this character called Buzzboy, who's kind of like Robin grown up, but he's extra goofy. He still, in his mind, hasn't grown up. And I tried to get that published by other publishers and eventually self-published it. And that led to me doing work for, different small publishers. Max Meow is my first book with a major publisher. But I usually say, since I was 5, because I was 5 years old when I got a book. I actually have a copy of it here.
Wow.
My dad had gotten me this book, and it's called The Great Comic Book Heroes, and it had all these different like descriptions, and it showed all these like old versions of the Human Torch and Batman, the very first appearance. But there's a section in it where the author, the editor, Jules Pfeiffer, who's a cartoonist himself, he actually shows a picture that he drew when he was 9 and talks about making his own comics. And then he actually got hired as a professional artist at 15.
Wow.
As a 6-year-old, 5 or 6-year-old, my mom probably read that to me, and I was like, oh, I can do this too. And and it's about that time my mom handed me the pencil and paper, and I would just take a piece of paper and fold it in half. And I always tell people those are real comics that you're creating at that point. And I always tell people to hold on to them, because there's some creators like Jeff Smith, who does a book from Scholastic called Bone. That's based on characters he created in 2nd grade.
Wow.
And then there's another one, Savage Dragon, is created by an artist named Eric Larson. Again, it was something he created when he was 13, and he's drawn now like 200 issues of the Savage Dragon comic.
So I know that you and Max are big literacy advocates and do many things to promote reading. Would you mind sharing a little bit about what you and Max Meow do to get kids excited about reading?
Well, I think the most important thing we do is try to tell a fun story. Because if someone's having fun, just like my son didn't quite realize he was reading when he was reading Dogman, or my nephew who read Bone, like this big 1,000-page collection, he just had so much fun reading it that he didn't realize how much he had read. And that's probably my biggest accomplishment, is having it be fun books that make people laugh. And that the other part is also just trying to not get too tricky when I write a story. And I say that, but like in my next book, there's time travel, and I had to be really careful not to get too tricky that would throw people off of where.
Like all the scientific stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, sometimes I like to throw science stuff in, and I don't want to overwhelm people with all that. So I try to keep it light and free, but also have a good message there when it matters.
I remember somewhere in the Max Meow Donuts in Danger, there was a little bit of a description about the Sizatron. I'm trying to find it right now. So it explained kind of the science behind it, and also behind a green screen. So I think that's pretty cool that you kind of share information, but also kind of keep it simple and sweet.
Yeah, exactly. And that the green screen came up because I wanted them to talk about the multiverse theory, which is something that I'm fascinated with. And I was like, wow, I want to describe this in a way that young people can read it and be like, oh, I get it. And because I learned about it when I was about 7, reading The Flash. Because The Flash, there were 2 Flashes from 2 different worlds. And anyone who sees the TV show now will know what I'm talking about. But that whole idea of multiple worlds was introduced to me when I was very young, and they did it in such a way that I still retain a lot of that today. And now it's exciting when, the Science Channel is talking about it, and you have Neil deGrasse Tyson actually describing it as real.
So I think the multiverse is really interesting, kind of complex, but if you kind of put it into the simplest details, I think it's really easy to understand. Like how, there's one E-Train here in this universe, and then in 1,000 universes over, there might be this E-Train who's sitting in a garbage can, drinking, like just drinking whatever he can drink.
Right. Or maybe, and then sometimes there can be little variances, like maybe there's a train that's wearing like a long tie versus a bow tie.
Or like he has a little dimple in the cheek that I don't have right now.
Exactly. Well, there used to be a Star Trek episode where they had two universes, and Mr. Spock, the pointy-eared first mate, he had a beard. That's how they showed the difference. So when I first did the multiverse theory, I was going to give everybody from the other dimension a beard, including me. But then it just looked it didn't make enough sense.
Yeah. You can be silly, but not too silly like that.
Right. Sometimes, if you do a joke on top of a joke, it can get confusing.
Mm-hmm. So I know you're a little short on time, but I still have a few more questions, if that's okay.
Sure.
So was there someone who inspired you to work in the book industry, a teacher, parent, author, or role model?
Well, I mentioned my mom, but I also had a fourth grade teacher named Miss Irwin. And she was the first person of all my teachers to really see how happy drawing comics made me. And she introduced the idea, like, John, because sometimes I would get distracted and not hand in my work. And I had a report that was past due. And she said something like, if you want to do it as a comic book, you could do that. I went home and drew that night.
That's the best kind of teacher.
Exactly. She took what is exciting for me and used it to teach me. And that was, I owe her so much. And luckily I've been able to see her. She's retired now, but she was teaching a summer camp for kids called Kids College. And I went in for her comics writing class, and I taught it for a week with her. And it was just like the greatest thing in the world.
Yeah, tell her I sent her my applause.
I will do that.
If you were going to pick any other profession besides being a comic book artist / author, what would it be and why?
I think probably an animator. That ties in with my comics. But I always love animation. One thing that I actually have a day job that I do at night or day. I'm a graphic designer, so I do magazine design. And I work for a publication called Ranger Rick, which is a kids' nature magazine.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, and so I'm really lucky because I've got two jobs, and they're both things that I really love. And I would love to write books and be a writer with prose, but I'm just not good enough right now. And that's something I think about, that maybe someday I'll do chapter books and different sorts of things. So, how about you? What's you want to be a writer right now? What are some other things that you like?
Well, I love arguing with people, so maybe a lawyer. Also, I think illustrations or just kind of being a journalist, that's kind of always been my dream. Being a journalist or sports analyst, because I dig sports. I've been watching sports for like my whole life, all the statistics and analytics that really interests me. So if I can't be a writer, maybe I could, like, for instance, middle grade books, maybe I can be a writer in like some way else, but not specifically an author.
Oh yeah, that sounds great. And sports writers, I mean, they have to make it interesting, not just for that person who knows all about the sport, but maybe the guy who picks up a newspaper and reads it about it for the first time.
If you could be any character in any book, who would you be and why?
That I really thought about that. There are times where I used to wish that I was like when I was younger, Harry Potter didn't exist. I would have loved to have had someone come and say, you're extra special and we're taking you away to this special place. I used to think that I was going to find out I was an alien. But maybe like Harry Potter is like a character who finds out how special he is. But the character that I most love and wish I could be as good as there's a book. It's my favorite book. It's called To Kill a Mockingbird.
Oh, I've
And
heard of it. Yeah.
yeah, it's considered one of the best books ever written, and it takes place in the Depression South. And there's a girl named Scout who tells this story about her dad, and her dad is this character Atticus Finch, who's an extremely moral and good lawyer, and it seems like everything Atticus does is incredible. So he's the character that I would most like to be like, because he's just like the perfect dad, the perfect person, and he tries to help, people that are not being represented well as a lawyer. He tries to help, like, the poor person that maybe doesn't get as much help as everybody else. And I think, so he's a big inspiration, and that's a book that I love to read every couple of years.
Yeah, he does sound like a great character. I for sure have to read To Kill a Mockingbird. I've heard it's like for like an older age group than I might be in right now, but I have heard great things about it from my cousins and from my parents. So I'm for sure going to read To Kill a Mockingbird. And I am so glad that you didn't pick a Harry Potter character. Almost every single person on my podcast has either picked someone from Harry Potter or mentioned it, and very nearly picked Hermione or Dumbledore. So thank you for that.
Wow, that probably shows how old I am compared to the other people you've been interviewing.
Well, you look pretty young.
I try to stay really immature, and that helps.
So thank you so much for taking time out of your Thursday to be interviewed, John. I really appreciate it.
Oh, well, thank you, E-Train. It's an honor to be on your show, and I hope, that you just continue to do this, and best of luck with your writing and everything that you do.
Thank you. So I don't think people realize how much goes into creating graphic novels, and hopefully my conversation with you has shed a light to all of you listeners. Writing and drawing graphic novels can be really hard, and like kudos to John Gallagher for doing both of that and 4 books so far.
That's right, and I'm working on the 5th one right now.
Yeah. I've known lots of people who enjoy the world of comics. In fact, my dad still loves reading graphic novels and graphic novel inspired movies. They never go out of style, and they do so much to promote literacy. My parents like to say that comic books can do everything from keeping adults connected to their youth to inspiring early readers to want to read. That's one of the amazing things your Max Meow series is doing. Your stories are inspiring kids to begin their lifelong reading journey.
Oh, well, thank you very much. That's such a great description and really complimentary. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much. Just a really big thank you. I know I'm saying it a lot, but really, thank you. I appreciate you. And it has been a pleasure speaking with you. I hope we can stay in touch.
Yes, you too.
So to all of you listening, my guest today has been John Gallagher, a writer, an artist, and a literacy advocate. I highly recommend reading the Max Meow series, and I'm not just saying that because I'm with the author. I'm also a fan and can't wait to see what adventures Max and Mindy and some other protagonists who might not be in Max Meow Donuts in Danger go on. Stay safe and happy reading.